Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really significant global event. The funeral of Pope Francis in Vatican City. That was Saturday, April 26, 2025. Our sources really paint a picture of the scale.
Oh, absolutely. Huge. You're talking, what, an estimated 200,000 people right there in St. Peter's Square?
And that's not counting everyone else lining the routes or watching from home.
Exactly. And then you had 130 official delegations there, world leaders, monarchs. It really shows the kind of reach Pope Francis had, doesn't it?
It does. And Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, in his sermon, he called him a pope among the people.
Yeah, with an open heart towards everyone. That phrase really stuck out.
It seems key to his legacy, that approachability, that connection.
Definitely.
So in this deep dive, we want to unpack this a bit. Look at who attended the actual ceremony. Some interesting points there, what Francis himself wanted for his farewell, and, well, what it all signifies.
Sounds good. Where should we start? The attendees.
Yeah, let's do that. The mix of global leaders was pretty striking.
It really was. You had Ukrainian President Zelensky there and U.S. President Donald Trump.
And they met before the funeral.
They did. The White House called it productive.
Yeah.
There was that photo released by Ukraine, too, with this British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Macron.
Quite a snapshot of current global politics right there at a papal funeral.
Exactly. And it wasn't just them. The list is long.
Over 50 heads of state, I read.
That's right. Brazil's Lula, former U.S. President Joe Biden, and Jill Biden, Macron again, obviously, Britain's Prince William. And, even the seating plan was interesting. Alphabetical, but based on the French spelling of the countries.
Ah, okay.
So you had the U.S. États-Unis sitting between Estonia and Finland. Little diplomatic quirks even then.
That's fascinating. And former President Trump made some comments about why he was there.
Yes, he mentioned attending out of respect, and
Yeah.
then he also brought up winning the Catholic vote in the past.
Right. He said something like, I won the Catholic vote and 56% of the vote. I don't know why we didn't get more.
That was the quote, yes.
It's quite a contrast, isn't it? That kind of political talk alongside Cardinal Re calling Francis a pope among the people.
It really highlights the different spheres Francis touched, I think. Personal faith, global politics. It all converged there.
Okay, so let's move on to the funeral ceremony itself. What were the key moments, the key rituals?
Well, it was led by Cardinal Re, the Dean of the College of Cardinals. It started very traditionally with Latin rites.
The Requiem Aeternam.
Exactly. Requiem aeternam dona ei Domine, et lux perpetua lucat ie. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord. And then Psalm 64. Ancient, solemn words.
And there was that powerful image right at the start,
Yes, the open book of the Gospels placed on the closed coffin.
symbolizing Christ's teachings being central.
Precisely. Central to Francis's ministry, central to the papacy itself. Very significant.
Then came the Liturgy of the Word. What readings were chosen?
First was from the Acts of the Apostles, read in English by Kielchi Gussie.
Acts 10, I think.
Yes, 10.3443. It's Peter describing Jesus doing good and healing.
Which connects directly to Francis's work, doesn't it? His focus on the poor, the marginalized.
Very much so. Then came Psalm 22, the Lord is my shepherd. Very familiar, comforting words.
And the second reading, there was a link to John Paul II's funeral.
That's right. It was from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians, read in Spanish by Edgar Pineda. It talks about heavenly citizenship, the transformation of the body.
And they used that same reading in 2005 for John Paul II.
Exactly. Maybe a deliberate connection being drawn there between those two major figures.
And the gospel reading?
That was from John chapter 21, chanted by Deacon Francesco Maloney.
The part with Jesus and Peter after the resurrection?
Yes, where Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? And tells him, feed my sheep, follow me. It's foundational for the papacy forgiveness, service, the call to lead.
Then after the readings, Cardinal Re gave the homily.
Yes, and he came back to that description. A pope among the people with an open heart towards everyone.
What else did he highlight?
He really emphasized Francis's awareness of global problems, his work for refugees. For the poor, he mentioned that first trip Francis took to Lampedusa.
A very symbolic first trip.
Indeed. And his constant calls for peace. Cardinal Re quoted him directly on war.
What was the quote?
War always leaves the world worse than it was before. It is always a painful and tragic defeat for everyone. Very powerful.
And how did the homily end?
With a direct appeal, almost a prayer to Francis himself. Dear Pope Francis, we now ask you to pray for us. May you bless the Church, bless Rome, and bless the whole world.
Must have been quite a moment.
Very moving, you'd imagine.
Now, there was something quite unusual, a first in the prayer of the faithful, wasn't there?
Yes, that was notable. Part of the prayer was delivered in Mandarin Chinese.
Which reflects his desire to visit China.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And the Vatican's ongoing efforts to, improve relations, it really underlined the global universal aspect of the church she seemed to strive for.
A really interesting diplomatic and religious signal there. What followed the prayers?
The liturgy of the Eucharist, the core of the Mass, the consecration of bread and wine.
And the sign of peace.
Yes, shared throughout the congregation,
Yeah.
including all the dignitaries. Then Holy Communion was distributed first to the cardinals, then out into those huge crowds in the square.
Many people kneeling behind barriers to receive it, I saw.
Yes. And the choir, the Sistine Chapel Choir, sang a communion antiphon from Psalm 129. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord.
And the final parts of the service?
The final commendation and valediction, led by Cardinal Ree, entrusting Francis's soul to God, invoking the saints.
And there was a Greek prayer as well.
Yes, a funeral prayer from the Byzantine liturgy, recited by representatives of the Eastern Catholic churches, showing that diversity within Catholicism.
And the music generally. You mentioned the Sistine Chapel Choir.
It was largely plainchant, quite austere, perhaps less ornate than some might have expected.
Which ties into something else we wanted to discuss, Francis's own wishes for simplicity.
Exactly. He made it quite clear he wanted simpler rites, didn't he? More like the funeral of a pastor, a disciple, rather than a monarch.
How did we see that play out?
Well, for one, his body was placed directly in the coffin, which was left open for a time for people to pay respects. More direct, perhaps less formal.
And his instructions for the burial itself were very specific.
Extremely specific. He wanted a simple tomb in the ground, he specified in his will.
No elaborate monument?
No. Simple, without particular ornamentation. Just the inscription, Franciscus. That's it.
And the location that was a big break with tradition.
Huge. Choosing the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, not within the Vatican walls in St. Peter's Basilica or the Vatican Grottos.
He's the first pope buried outside the Vatican in over a century.
That's right. And the first at Santa Maria Maggiore in, over 300 years? A really significant choice.
And there's a symbolic element planned for his arrival there, too.
Yes, very poignant. A group of poor and needy people were scheduled to be there to welcome his body.
Reflecting his constant focus on the marginalized.
Directly. It speaks volumes. Even small details, like the marble for the tombstone reportedly coming from his grandparents' town in Liguria.
A personal touch.
Very much so. And the hearse for the procession was reported to be the Pope-mobile he used. Again, avoiding that sort of regal pomp.
So, after the Mass in St. Peter's Square finished, what happened next? The journey to Santa Maria Maggiore.
Right. His body was taken back into St. Peter's Basilica very briefly, presumably for some private prayers or rituals.
And then the procession started.
Yes, in the early afternoon. About a 6-kilometer route, roughly 3.7 miles from the Vatican, across the river, through Rome to Santa Maria Maggiore.
And this was a public procession.
Oh, yes. Moving slowly, at walking pace, through the heart of the city.
So people could line the streets.
Exactly. Large crowds were expected, and they turned out, to pay their final respects as he passed. A very public farewell on the streets of Rome.
It really feels like every element of the day, from the global leaders to the type of tombstone, reflected Francis.
I think so. It was this moment of intense global focus, world leaders all gathered, but at the same time it felt grounded in his desire for simplicity, his connection to ordinary people.
And the ceremony, the burial plans, they really did seem to echo the main themes of his papacy, didn't they?
Absolutely. That outreach to the marginalized, the constant call for peace, trying to foster a less ostentatious, maybe more pastoral style of faith. It was all there.
The use of Mandarin in the prayers, choosing to be buried outside the Vatican, those feel like quite significant signals.
They really do. They hint at an evolving church, maybe. One looking outwards, engaging with the world in different ways, adapting.
When you think about who was there, the powerful politicians, the ordinary faithful, the students, the poor people waiting at the Basilica, what does that range tell you about his impact?
It tells you his impact was incredibly broad. He somehow managed to resonate with people from completely different walks of life across the globe. That's quite remarkable in today's world.
So this marks the end of his pontificate, obviously, but it's also the start of whatever comes next for the Catholic Church. The conclave to choose his successor is coming up.
Indeed. The big question now.
What parts of Pope Francis's legacy do you think will weigh most heavily on the cardinals as they make that choice?
That's tough to say for sure, but you'd have to think his emphasis on pastoral care, on mercy, his focus on the poor and migrants, that call for a church that goes out to the peripheries, those themes seem likely to be very much in the minds of the electors. His vision for a more engaged, less inward-looking church.
A lot for them to consider, and a lot for us to reflect on, too. Thank you for walking us through all of that.
My pleasure. It was a truly historic day.
And for you listening, as you think about Pope Francis's funeral, that unique blend of global ceremony and intended simplicity, what does it suggest to you about his mark on the world and perhaps the future direction of the institution he led? Something to ponder.